Hi there and welcome to this analysis of the YJ oil and gas case. My name is Nick Pest, and for those of you who haven't come across me or know me, I've been working for CIMA exams now since 1997, so quite a few years going back, and actually a big focus of that time, certainly over the last 8 or 9 years, has been focused on the top CIMA or T4 case study. It is what I spend most of my time focusing upon, producing mock exams. I wrote the official CIMA learning system, working with the examiner on that. I produce video analysis of every exam now. I've done analysis of the exams for the last, how many sittings must that be? 20 sittings or so. It's getting up to now. And so what I hope to do in this video series is bring that knowledge and expertise of all those past exams and all those past case studies to you, to tell you what I think you really need to know that comes out of this pre-scene to get you best prepared for the exam. The whole of our courses and mock exams and so on, that's our whole aim is to get you in the best position for your exam, and that's what I hope to do as part of this video series. So what we'll be doing then is going through on a section by section basis, going through this case page by page, pulling it. I think this is a key point, and this is another key point. I'm going to be particularly focusing on business models. So I'll be picking up on things, well, there's a key strength for the SWOT analysis, or there's a T in the Pest, a technological issue we must bring up. Here's a 5 forces issue, perhaps it's competitors, perhaps it's supplier power, and so on. So I'll be thinking about all of the business models, and what we'll do is we'll end up by going through a strategic analysis. Now, what I should say is that you can download the strategic analysis in the presentation format for free, and you can get that by signing up on our website. And so you've got that anyway, but as part of the video series, I should be actually going through, giving you my views of the full strategic analysis and talking you through that. What I should also be doing is, as we go through, I shall be pulling up what I think are the key unseen issues. What do we think is going to come up on the day of the exam? And the examiners do give us lots of hints and tips. And at the end, I'll be summarising and have a final video, which is my top 10 most likely issues that I think are going to come up in the exam. And of the last exam, we were really lucky. Well, whether it was luck or just great judgment on my part, I don't know. But of my top 5 issues, 4 of those actually came up on the day of the exam. But what that tells us is that typically the points that come out of the pre-scene is where the examiner is focused, and they write the pre-scene, then they write the unseen, and they are going to link those two together as best they can. So my hope will be to be as accurate this time, and hopefully to give you a good focus on what is most likely to be the key things that come up in the exam. Just because you know what the issues are that might come up in the exam does not at all mean that you're going to do well at it, but it's certainly a good starting point. What I also hope to do is give you my exam hints and tips as we go through. The purpose of this video series is not to teach you how to pass the exam. That's not what this is about. But it's just that if, as I come through, I think, oh yeah, that might be relevant for ethics, and tell you a bit about the ethics section, or something that might be to do with diversity in industry examples. As I think of anything that might be relevant as I go through, I will be raising that, even though it's not the direct reason to do it. That's what my tuition videos and course and so on is for. Okay, this first video is free, and the remaining videos are available to purchase on Astranti.com, and my hope is that you will go through and find value if you go through and purchase the full video series. But if you just watch this first free video, I'm sure that there'll be lots of hints and tips and points just on this first one that will get you started in moving forward towards the exam. So I hope you'll get value if you just watch this, and even more value if you go and buy the full series of our video series on this. So first thing I've got, which is just a little bit of hopefully exam-based value for all of you, is just a few points for you on the case study and the importance of this case study for the exam, and actually things you shouldn't be doing in relation to that. So let's have a look at that. Right, so the pre-scene then. First thing to be aware of is that this is just the context. It's the background to the case. It is not the exam itself. The exam is what you get on the day of the exam. Now, big point about that is that issues in the pre-scene should not be mentioned on the day of the exam unless they are in the unseen. So, we're going to be going through talking about issues. We might say, okay, well, maybe an issue in oil and gas is fracking, something like that. If fracking doesn't come up on the day of the exam, you do not mention fracking. You should not be talking about fracking and lots of issues and problems and concerns over that, if that's not what's on the unseen. So you should only on the day of the exam deal with what's in the exam. So a warning for you is what you mustn't do is you mustn't go into the exam with a pre-prepared answer. Your answer must be based on what's on the day of the exam. However, let's go back to this key point up above, context and background. One of my biggest frustrations when I'm looking at mock exams and looking at people's scripts is so often what they are doing is they are completely forgetting the pre-scene. This pre-scene gives you the background to the exam. It's your basis for your decisions. Let's say there's an issue in the exam and it's opportunity to get into fracking or expand fracking or something along those lines as a method of oil or gas production. That your decision as to whether to go ahead with that or not will firstly be based on what's in the unseen in the exam, but more likely it will be based on, do we think that's a good way forward for them based on all the information we've been given and background information. Let's say there was an issue which is that the business is going to be taken over, or there's a potential takeover opportunity. Well, the question is, do we think that's a good idea given everything we find out in the pre-scene about the stakeholders, the shareholders, what's right for employees, what's right for everyone, basically. So it gives you that context and background. And as I said, one of my key frustrations is that people look at this pre-scene at the early stages of their studies. They start doing lots of mock exams, and by the time of the day of the exam, they've pretty much forgotten what the pre-scene was, and they don't use that pre-scene. But one of the keys to passing this exam is that you have got good logical analysis. And logical analysis means doing something which is appropriate to the business and the background and the context. Other key point for you is coming out of the pre-scene, you must come up with industry examples. The diversity part of the exam is 5 marks specifically for 5 industry examples. And the industry examples won't be in the pre-scene, but you do need to go away and learn those. Of course, you can we do an industry pack with 60 industry examples that using our judgment and years of experience, what we think are going to be some really great ones you could use in the exam. So of that 60, your aim is to use 5. But you do need to go away, even if you just do your own research on that, and learn examples from the real life industry, and then find ones that are going to be appropriate to what's in the unseen. So the case study then is the background, and you must use it on the day of the exam, not directly, but as a context for good logical analysis about what is right for the business. One final point here is that you are the accountant. The idea here is that as probably you'll end up being the senior accountant is often the way they phrase it, and management accountant is another one that they put down. You should know this business in effect as well as you know your own business. You don't know absolutely everything, but you know enough that your analysis as an internal accountant within this business will be equivalent to what it would be within your own business. Okay, so you do need a reasonable amount of knowledge of this business and the industry, and that's going to be part of what you're working on over the next few weeks and months. Good. So let's move on then and take a look at the case study itself and start to pull out some first points. Now, as I've said, I'm going to be going through section by section, and the first section that I'm going to do as part of this first video is page 2 down to the title of licenses on page 3. So I'm going to be going through the section on industry background, and I'm going to be covering down to this section, Upstream Operations, not including licenses. So that section on licenses is where I'm going to stop this first video. So what I would like you to do is just pause the video for a moment and go through and have a read through that section, pulling out all of the key points that you can. What I will just say to you as a kind of bit of guidance for that is that this section is a really good section for our pest analysis. Now, the pest analysis in the exam is a really easy model to put into your appendix. If you're going to be putting appendices in, the examiner really, as in recent post-exam guys, has been getting very frustrated with people putting appendices in and then not using them in the main body of their report. So if you're going to put something like a pest analysis in the back, you must refer to it in your main descriptions as you're going through. Okay, but what I would just say to you is, particularly as you're reading through these sections, be thinking, what are the political, economic, social and technical issues as they relate to this particular industry, because there's loads of information on there that could make up an excellent pest analysis that could go in the back of your case and be applied to the unseen on the day of the exam. So pause the video here, read that through, apply pest analysis and any other models or anything else you think might be relevant. Think about what issues you think are being hinted at that come up here, and then come back to me in a few minutes' time and I will give you my perspective. Okay then, so let's start by just thinking about this oil and gas industry. What I would say as a starting point is that in relation to recent industries, this is quite a tough industry. The last case study was N Retail, and N Retail was a department store. And of course, the beauty of a department store is that we've all been into department stores or even large shops and supermarkets and so on. We kind of know the business because we've been customers of that business. However, we may buy petrol and gas, okay, but what we don't do is we don't really know very much at all about gas drilling, exploration, managing oil rigs and gas fields and all those kind of things. That makes it quite a tough industry. There's a lot for you to get your head around that's likely to be quite new. Okay, so new for many of us. And I put us in there because it's new for me as well. Okay. I know very little about this industry, and for me it's about my research and understanding this industry to be able to then guide and help you as part of that. So one of the challenges, of course, not just for students but for the tutors, to get their head around that new industry and what the likely issues are going to be and what the examiners are going to be thinking about. Oh, but do remember as well, this is also new for the examiner. The examiner would have known nothing about this industry before they did their research. What I would say about the examiner or examiner team, there's a team of examiners and the examiners tend to swap from sitting to sitting to sitting. So you will have an examiner this sitting that was most likely the examiner from 2 sittings ago. Okay. Okay. So this is quite a tough industry, lots of research, probably more than would have been the case for those that sat the previous case study. I will say though, it's an interesting industry. Okay, I think that it's a huge industry, worldwide, global industry, oil and gas, with some huge businesses, which I'll talk about as part of this video. Actually, I'm going to go through the top 6 or 7 businesses in the world in this industry. But interesting industry to look into, and really useful to us. Lots of information online and easily available to do industry research. No shortage of it. If we go back a couple of cases ago, we had vehicle maintenance for large fleet companies, and it was virtually impossible to come up with information and examples. Here, loads of it. They'll be in the press. They'll have financial statements, many of the big companies. It's going to be a really easy one to get information from. Okay, my first focus then is going to be the timings that are mentioned in this section. Let's have a look at a couple of these. So what they've said here is that oil reserves have got about 40 years of proven reserves, and that natural gas reserves are about 60 years. So from that point of view, what I would say is that for our company, which is YJ, that certainly the medium term is secure. What that means is that we're not going to have to be worrying too much about diversification into other energy sources for this exam. You know, we're not going to be thinking 100 years ahead about our 100-year survival when all the oil and gas is gone. You know, there's an issue for the world generally about in 100, 150 years where all our energy is going to come from. And that is a problem for energy companies in the very, very long term. But for our company, this is not really something for a particular focus for us, which is quite useful because it means we haven't got to worry about too many other forms of energy. That's not to say in the exam they couldn't come up with an idea of, well, an option of going into solar power, something like that. Those kind of issues do come up as a kind of a form of diversification, and so that's possible, but it's not necessary. And this is, you know, going back to the point I was making about context. So the context is that YJ, we find out later on, is that they are a oil and gas, and they explore and they produce that gas. They don't actually sell the petrol in the petrol stations and so on. But is movement into, say, solar power something that's suitable for them or not? This is where your context from the Preseen comes in. We can start to generate ideas as to whether we think that's a good idea in advance of going into the exam. So if it does come up as an issue, we can hopefully have a good view of it. Now, my view here is that actually we don't need to go out of oil and gas in the short term for pure diversification because it's not run out as of yet. And this is where context comes in. So that's my first point for you. Second point that I'm going to kind of bring up from these is this idea of improved technology. So it talks about it in relation to the oil, and also it talks about it in relation to gas. So new technology is helping to extend that life cycle. And what does this mean from YJ's point of view? Well, I suppose the first thing we can do is we can put a pest analysis in, and particularly the T in the pest analysis technology is going to be key to anyone operating in this business area. It can help to maximize the amount of oil and gas that comes out of the ground. For instance, the idea of hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's become known, a technique to help get more oil and gas out. It's actually been around for many, many years. The late 40s was when fracking was first developed, and it's been used, but it's being used to a really great extent to get gas out of places that we couldn't have actually got gas out of before, just over the last 10 years, and that's why that's suddenly become big news. But critically then, YJ must ensure they keep up to date with those changes in technology, and potentially this can give new opportunities. So in our SWOT analysis, the opportunity, for instance, to go into a new area such as fracking, I think is something that is really quite a likely one to come up in one of the exams. My guess, and for anyone, particularly if you're not UK based, you might not be aware of this, but in the UK news, at about the time that the examiner would have been thinking about, well, what should I have my latest case on, fracking was big news in the UK. There were protest groups going around this fracking site in the UK. It was on the national news for a period of 2 or 3 weeks while this was going on. There is lots of uncertainty about the impact on the environment in areas where there is fracking. For anyone that doesn't know, fracking is basically where you pump high pressure, usually water, but mixed with chemicals, down into the ground. It creates these sort of incisions and gaps in the ground, but that releases oil, gas, actually other chemicals that can then be driven back up through. You wouldn't have been able to get to that gas. It's become huge in America, huge money to be made there. They've started doing it in the UK, and there's a lot of issues over the kind of social impact. Again, we come back to the pest. There's the social impact of what that's going to mean on the people that are around that fracking site. There have been concerns because they're pumping this water down that it's actually going to affect the water for local residents, and there have been cases in America where it appears to have done that. There's been talk of earthquakes coming as a result of this, although that's been largely downplayed. But there's a big social impact about that. And so that's, of course, in the pest analysis is going to be key. It also then leads to the political impact as well, because then the decision comes politically. As a government, are we going to allow that and encourage that and pump funds into developing that area, or are we going to actually prevent it because we're too fearful of the risks that are involved? And so the political element comes in. If you get something come up on fracking, then, and actually, I would not be at all surprised if that was, we've yet to find out. Well, when we get to later in the case, we'll find out what YJ really do and the extent that they're into that. But something about fracking as a new opportunity or a consideration of that, I think, is quite likely to come up just because of the fact that this is, so we've already had it hinted at here in this first section, and it was around the time when the examiner would have been writing this case and the exams that this was big in the news. And so wouldn't be at all surprised to see that. Looking at the big picture though, okay, we have this very long term, it's going to be, oil and gas is going to be available for the medium to long term, and new technology must be taken into account as well. Let's go up and take a look at this first paragraph. One thing that's almost certainly to be an issue is corporate social responsibility, and this is hinted at here right in the first paragraph, is that it says natural gas is described as the cleanest of all fuels as it generates the lowest levels of carbon emissions. Corporate social responsibility is regularly in the exam. You can often bring it up as part of the ethics part of the exam. It is just the right thing to do for society, ethically, that we should be thinking about the people of the world and the globe in relation to keeping emissions down. And of course, burning oil is one of the key ways that the world is causing global warming and climate change. And so corporate social responsibility is going to be key. We'll find out later on, and we'll take a look through as we go through the case the extent to which YJ are doing that, and they are focused on it. What I will say is that we know that in the exam, if you go back about 4 or 5 sittings now, the whole case was supermarkets and the social responsibility of supermarkets. And we know the examiners like it. We know it's important. We know it's a big social trend. In fact, again, in the pest, you should be putting in, as far as the S is concerned, the social trend towards environmental awareness. And that's going to be an increasing part of any oil and gas company's focus. And the examiner, again, is hinting at that here. They also talk about the different regions of the world. This is a global industry. We find out a little bit later that our company is a UK-based company, but certainly it's worldwide. And actually, we'll see, they talk about Saudi Arabia possessing over 20% of the known oil reserves. In a couple of minutes, I'm just going to go through some of the key companies. And the number one global company is Saudi Aramco. And basically, one of the keys is that for a company like YJ is that they may have to just go and operate all around the world wherever the gas fields are, coping with the local cultures and so on. So there will be oil and gas fields everywhere, and actually focusing on certain parts of the world and expertise in those different parts of the world and being aware of that is going to be a key part of their operations. It's also worth saying that it is actually something which is key politically. Something like the world's number 2 oil and gas company is Russia's Gazprom, and Gazprom is a huge source of political power for the Russian government and President Putin, and they use that to influence companies in the region. And so that creates political strength. The third biggest producer in the world is the National Iranian Oil Company. And of course, that creates these political issues. There have been sanctions against Iran, but Iran have been getting the oil out through India and so on. So there's huge political issues here. So any company that's in oil and gas exploration is going to have to deal with the political elements. Companies that were in Libya as part of the Libyan, or prior to the Libyan crisis recently, suddenly they've had to deal with a whole new government and war going on in the country, and safety of staff issues for people working in that region, and so huge political context. And again, in the Pest analysis, what we need to do is be aware of that. So one thing that we'll be looking at later on is, where do YJ operate? Where are their oil and gas fields? Was that going to mean for them politically, linking through then to economically, socially and technically? This is going to be a key thing for us to look into. One thing to say about the exam is that the exam itself will be about a company. You will be an accountant within YJ, and you have to see the political context as being, well, is it a good idea politically, given the political context? You won't have to be commenting on, you won't have part of the exam won't be you saying what is right and wrong politically. Okay, that isn't the way the exam works. Good. Next thing for me to cover then are just the types of companies. So different types of companies in oil and gas. One is upstream, which is the exploration, drilling, and drilling of exploratory wells, production of crude oil and natural gas. This is basically what YJ do, and this is the market that they are in. So that's going to be our key focus. As the case study says just over the page, is that our focus is upstream operations only. Okay. Midstream is about the transportation of that by tankers around the world. So the shipping of it, these huge tankers that ship oil from the oil producers through to, well, everywhere in the world that needs that. And then the downstream is the distributing of the byproducts from refined oil. So you take your crude oil and then you refine it into things like petrol and retail gas down to retail level. So you've got people that have petrol stations, your BP and Shell and so on, that will have petrol stations as part of their group. Also the people that will sell gas in the UK, British Gas and so on, would be right down the stream. So YJ are not midstream, they are not downstream. Now there's a point to this. Now the case study is only concerned with upstream operations. 2 exams ago in the BVS case, we had a similar statement. But when it came to the unseen exam, that didn't mean the examiner wasn't going to consider possible opportunities that might be midstream or downstream. It's just that this company, in a sense, another way of rewriting this is that YJ is upstream at the moment. We could consider midstream and downstream. My guess is that the examiner probably doesn't think it's necessary. So let's put that in. Okay, so let's say there's an opportunity for our company to start selling gas directly to UK consumers. It's probably a step of diversification too far. They don't have the knowledge or the expertise. We're working with so many customers in such a close fashion, would be my guess. Again, we'll find more about what they do later on. But my guess is the examiner's probably thinking that those are kind of bad ideas for this company. They don't have the knowledge and expertise. And this is the examiner's hint about this. Of the upstream activities, then YJ are an operating company, and as are actually the majority of our famous names, the BP and the Shell and the ExxonMobil and the Gazprom and so on. These are all operating companies as well. The other types of companies are drilling companies who undertake drilling of oil rigs and so on, contractors of other outsourced services. It could be services that would be on your oil rigs or at your gas, which it could be something as simply as catering or something like that, as well as oil and gas related elements. Floating production, storage and offloading vessels is typically related to oil rigs, and floating storage vessels that would be near to oil rigs or near to ports where they are holding significant amounts of typically oil or liquid gas for long periods of time, and just other service companies which are sort of ad hoc outsourcers, basically test drilling, divers. Actually, catering comes into this sort of section as well. So, another type of contractor, effectively, just there. So, what does this mean in relation to YJ? YJ are primarily up here as an operating company, a small operating company, effectively, and we'll again see them as we go on. Whereas many of these others are suppliers. Just for instance, a drilling company, we find out later on that the drilling companies are a supplier of YJ. They could also be opportunities as well. So could, for instance, we buy a drilling company, or we do more of our own drilling, or we buy a catering company, or we employ our own divers rather than using a service company. So these are possible issues that are much, much closer to YJ's operations than, I don't know, selling petrol or selling gas, and much more likely to be the types of things we're going to be saying, okay, yeah, let's start our own drilling company and let's sell drilling services, not just for us, but we'll sell them to the big providers as well. So let's have our own team of divers and we'll start doing that. So there are opportunities to move into those areas. Again, we need to find out later on exactly what YJ are doing and aren't doing at the moment. But whatever they're not doing in this area are more likely to be things that they would consider as good new opportunities if the proposal is right. One final thing I want to do is to tell you a little bit about the operating companies that are in this particular industry. And what I've got for you here are the world's top 7 oil and gas producing companies. The reason I've gone down to 7 is simply that numbers 6 and 7 are very well known worldwide, particularly in Western sort of countries, but probably worldwide as well would be the better known ones. So I wanted to include those in there as well. So let's have a quick look at those. But what I also need to do, is think about what is the context of these huge global operating companies in relation to a small company like YJ. So, Saudi Aramco are the world's biggest oil producer. They produce 12.5 million barrels a day. So they are absolutely huge. They turn over $1 billion a day. So it does show you the importance and how global this industry is. We saw just a little bit earlier, 20% of the world's oil reserves are in Saudi Arabia. And of course, that's effectively a nationalized company. In fact, we find these nationalized companies a big part of some of the major companies, because of course the governments tend to control a lot of the oil and gas in some countries. So Gazprom is the number 2. This is Russia. They are the world's leading natural gas production company. I mentioned them a minute ago in relation to the political elements and Putin helping to use that to control, to gain political strength. They had $40 billion of profits in 2012. So we're talking a huge company, huge revenues, huge profits. Let's go on to number 3, which is the National Iranian Oil Company. And they produce on average 6.4 million barrels a day. Okay, the National Iranian Oil Company, of course, have had problems recently with sanctions in Iran, and of course there have been lots of discussions just going on in the last few months over trying to remove those sanctions. And so again, it shows the importance and the how oil and gas lead to kind of political issues and government interference and so on. Despite that, they are still, by production, the third biggest producer in the world. So it does show you that even given all of those figures were again 2012 when the sanctions were all fully in place. So still huge company. Then we come on to some of the more Western firms that we might all be familiar with. We've got ExxonMobil. They have revenues of 400 billion a year and 40 billion of profits. So again, absolutely huge companies. Number 5 is PetroChina. As you can imagine, with a Chinese company, they are growing very quickly, and there's talk of them being as big as Gazprom in the next few years. Then number 6 is BP, and the number 7 is Shell. So we have got, I've gone down to number 7 because BP and Shell will be well known to many people. The advantages in terms of your industry research of companies like BP and Shell is you can go and have a look at their website. There'll be huge amounts of information and company news that will be available on them. They will produce financial accounts and you'll be able to look at their accounts. ExxonMobil, no doubt, you'll be able to find information on them. Something like the National Iranian Oil Company and PetroChina, Saudi Aramco, it's unlikely you're going to be getting any useful information from those types of companies. So in terms of your industry research, perfectly fine to be giving industry examples from the BPs and the Shells and the ExxonMobils. But just also bear in mind that YJ are much smaller than these companies. And so therefore, this is a hugely competitive industry of which YJ are really, even though they've got profits in the millions of dollars, they are really a small company in comparison to some of these absolute giants. It could be that they could be something like a buyout target if we're looking at issues. I could easily see an issue like one of these big companies is attracted to YJ because they've got some particularly good oil, some technology perhaps, or they've got some good, they've developed some good fields that they want to get their hands on. So that could easily be an element. Also think about this from the point of view of Porter's 5 forces, that the competitors in this industry are big and they are strong. And so if you get an issue come up in the exam which relates to the competitiveness or something to do with pricing and things like that, then you can mention something like the 5 forces and the competitiveness of perhaps getting good oil fields or investigating those oil fields and so on. So it might end up being quite expensive given that kind of competition, also given relatively limited ability to find good new fields to develop. So, so 5 forces could come into that as well. So bear those points in mind. Great. So this is the end of our first video. I hope for those of you just watching this as a single one-off, I hope that you found that as a good introduction to the case. I also hope actually that many of you will go and buy the remaining videos. As I've said before, you can get those at www.astranti.com, and I'll go through the rest of the section of the notes in the same way. We'll do a financial analysis. I'll give you my top 10 issues. I'll do a strategic analysis for you as well. So hopefully that's something that you will find of good value. A quick note, if you're just again listening to this as a one-off, one thing that really is important for you in your studies is doing mock exams, and we are currently in the process, as I'm recording this, of starting to produce our mock exams for this paper as well. So really useful for you to practice mock exams. It's probably the key difference between people passing and failing this exam is mastering exam technique, mastering the report format, practicing that with the mock exams, and going into the real exam with those in mind. And of course our mock exams, I will base those largely on what I think are going to be the top issues that are going to come up into the exam as well. Good, and good luck with you if you go on and do that. Brilliant. That's the end of video 1.